Houston, Annapolis Center, do you have any test operations restricted area 2508?
Aries 31, roger. Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion, over.
Roger, Aries 31, continue to send at your discretion, over.
Okay, Center. The traffic is approaching head-on, ultra bright, and really moving. They're right by us right now.
There are 1,000 UFO sightings reported around the world every month. 90% of these sightings can be explained, but 10% cannot. Officially and unofficially, the U.S. military has been investigating UFOs since 1947. Their top secret goal is to find out what's behind these unexplained sightings. The Pentagon classifies them as unusual airborne anomalies, but a better term is X-Files. Join us now as Mack Lois and Commander Cobra explore these unsolved cases, UFO incidents that baffle even the U.S. military. This is Mack Maloney's Military X-Files. And now, here's Mack Maloney.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. This is Mack Maloney. We have a special kind of show for you tonight. It's some live bits and some greatest hits. But helping me in this endeavor in the studio with me tonight is the lovely Lois Lane.
Hi, Mac. Hi, everybody. Get ready for a fun night.
Fun night. Are you strapped in? Are you ready? That's the question.
Oh, me? I thought you were asking the audience. I'm ready. You can see I didn't miss a beat.
And you are strapped in, as it turns out. Okay, good. Well, listen, why don't we do, without further ado, why don't we just tell people how they can get their bag of swag?
Well, if you want some cool merch from the show, all you have to do is go to mackmaloney.com, click the Contact Us button, send us your home address so we can actually snail mail you a bag filled with swag. Okay. And it will have things like pins and coasters and other surprises.
Buttons, family pins, 3D decals, stuff like that. And so just send us your mailing address. Go to mackmaloney.com, hit the contact button, and send us an email that includes your mailing address. Because the funny thing is we've given lots of this stuff away already, but people will just send me an email and say, send me the swag, a nice letter or whatever, but say, send me the swag, and they don't realize that
you need to actually mail it,
right? Yes.
As I said, through snail mail.
So it doesn't magically go through,
yes,
the computer.
Mailing address, please,
so,
everyone.
Anyway, the bag of swag. And what else can we do? We can do the plugs right now. Hopefully, people are donating to Homes for Our Troops. Homes for Our Troops is a organization that takes your donations, 88 cents of every dollar, and puts it to building homes for veterans, post 9/11 veterans of the war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, folks who have lost their legs or their arms or have some kind of disability because of the war. And what they do is that they build them these homes that are very accessible for someone in their situation, lower counter space, stairs that are a little easier to get up and down, things of that nature. And when they build them the house and then they just give them the mortgage, they don't have to pay for it. They give it to them for free. Now, these people deserve it. They put their lives on the line for us. And, I think the Veterans Administration and the government should be doing this, but that's another show. They rely on your donations, okay? Homes for Our Troops, it's a very worthy cause, very good organization. It's not a charity. It's something that we have a moral obligation to do for these veterans. So please, Homes for Our Troops, and donate.
Super worthy cause. And if you are looking to help somebody, this is a way to do it.
Mm-hmm. And nice people, too. They're on the show a lot. So, Homes for Our Troops. Okay, so I think that's it as far as the plugs are concerned. Is it? I'm looking at you, Lois, like you would know.
Well, I do know. Sometimes you mention the mosquito, so
Oh, yeah. The People's Mosquito Project, Ross Sharp and his Mad Englishmen friends are putting back together a warplane from World War II, made of wood, 2 big Rolls-Royce engines on it. It was one of the fastest planes in World War II. It was so fast that
it outran the bullets.
Wow. Juan must have taught you that. Okay.
I do pay attention.
The People's Mosquito Project. And also, I should say, Wingman 21 is coming out very soon. If it's not out already, go on Amazon.com. Wingman 21, it's called the Jericho Storm. People have read it before publication, seem to like it. So
I've heard it called your best one yet.
Oh, who said that? Me? No, who knows? The Jericho Storm. Just go on Amazon and see if it's up there yet. I'm the last to know. And, give it a shot. If you've never read a Wingman book before, this would be a good one to read. Wow, so we get the plugs out of the way, and it's just the beginning of the show there, Lois.
Oh, my goodness. We are so efficient.
Right. So why don't we do this? Why don't we explain that we have we have one oldie but goodie from a couple of years ago where I interview a woman who wrote a book on DARPA, which is like the mad scientists of the Pentagon. And then we have just different things that have come up in the studio tonight. Is that it, Lois?
I think that's it. And they will be fascinated if they haven't heard of DARPA before. It's remarkable what went on.
Yeah, they are literally the mad scientists in the Pentagon. Yeah. It's really a great story.
And the inventions that came out of it are amazing.
Really crazy. And also, I think we're probably going to have a Sky Club music collection at the end of the show. So it's everything wrapped up in a bow there, Lois.
It's a bit of a smorgasbord tonight, everybody.
Wow, big word. Okay.
Well, I'm not asking them to spell it.
Well, I know. I didn't know you spoke Swedish.
Well, there's many things you don't know about me, Mac.
Really? Okay. Wow. There's another show. That's definitely a Mac after dark. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take a commercial break now and get on with the show? You're listening to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. We'll be right back after this.
Do you know where the world's most secret bases are located? Do you know what spooky action at a distance means? Is there a conspiracy by aliens to prevent us from conquering space? And where is the best place in the United States to see a real UFO? Find the answers to all these questions and more in Mack Maloney's new book, Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe. Visit places you never knew existed: the Phantom Tunnels of Tokyo, the UFO Trail in South America, Ong's Hat, and the very mysterious M Triangle. Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe contains hundreds of reports on ghosts, haunted planes and ships, weird celebrity deaths, mysterious sounds, and a breakdown of every monster in America, state by state. You've heard him talk about it on the radio. Now, get all of Mack's paranormal research in one large volume. Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe, with a foreword by the very famous Wan Wan. On sale now in your local bookstore or on Amazon.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. This is Mack Maloney. Wow, what a show we have for you tonight. But first, let me introduce you to the very lovely Lois Lane, who is here with us.
Hi, Mac. Hi, everybody.
Are you enjoying yourself tonight, Lois?
I'm getting an education, actually.
Are you really? Okay, so you didn't have to go to school. You didn't have to go to college.
No, I just have to tune in to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files.
There you go. We'll have to make that a bumper. Tonight we're going to be talking about this very strange place in the Himalayas called Aksai Chin. And it's a region of the Himalayas up in one of the worst, most inhospitable parts of the planet. Way up in the Himalayas, the border between China and India is almost unmarked. Very few people live there. It's just treacherous high mountains, gorges. It's ice all the time, lots of snow. Very, very isolated place. But what's strange about this place is over the years, people on both sides of the border have claimed that it's a place where a lot of UFOs are seen landing. A lot of UFOs are seen coming out of the gorges and the topography there. It's just a hotspot for UFOs, even though it's in one of the most isolated places on Earth. Ever hear of this place, Lois?
Well, I read about it in a book by Mack Maloney.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, what a coincidence. But anyway, the connection to this and military exiles is this. There's a place in China about 300 miles from Beijing and about 1,500 miles away from Aksai Chin, where the Chinese military, out in the middle of the desert, has built this scale model replica of all places, the region called Aksai Chin. It was built to a scale of 1 to 500. It's very, very detailed. It shows all kinds of treacherous roads and, as I say, gorges and high mountains. Just one of the worst places on Earth. But for one reason or another, we don't know why, the Chinese military decided to build this very, very elaborate and large recreation of this place in up in the Himalayas. No one knows why. They're not telling anybody. It was built close to a military base, Chinese military base, and it's actually out in the desert. There's been a lot of speculation. Why would they do this? Now, the U.S. military, like out west in Nevada and in California, they build replicas of things like villages that our soldiers might come up across in the Middle East, places in Southeast Asia where our soldiers might have to fight someday. These places are places where you go and you practice how to, take over buildings, how to fight in the desert, how to fight in the woods, how to fight near the ocean, and so on. But they're built to full scale. In fact, they actually hire actors from the local population to play the bad guys. There's a huge one down in North Carolina where people play these war games all the time. Citizens are recruited to be the enemy, and our soldiers go down there and practice fighting them in the middle of the woods. It's called Pineland. So anyway, getting back to this place in China. People have speculated, well, why would the Chinese do this? Now, when you see this from Google Earth, when you see it shot from a satellite, it looks like this place, Aksai Chin, even though it's 1,500 miles to the east of it. In fact, that's how it was first discovered. Someone was looking at Google Earth, a researcher, and he saw this place and said, wow, this is like 1,500 miles away from where it should be. And then on closer inspection, he found out, and others later found out, that this was just this recreation, this scale model that the Chinese, for some reason, built there. Some people speculated that it might be of use to their pilots, their fighter pilots, their helicopter pilots. But, why? Once again, why? Out in this very, very isolated, crazy place near the Himalayas. Now, let's just go into some of the history of this Aksai Chin. We have to go back to October of 1962. And lots of people will remember, or if you read your history books, you realize that this is the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Basically what happened, the Russians put nuclear missiles in Cuba that were powerful enough and had the range enough to hit Washington, D.C., hit all the major cities in the United States. So in other words, the Russians basically put a nuclear missile base right off of the coast of Florida, 90 miles away from Florida. This caused one of the biggest crises ever in U.S. history. Russia and the United States came very, very close to having a nuclear war. If they did, none of us would be around now talking about it. And it went on for about 2 weeks. And if you lived through it, you know what anxiety is, because you just expect it at any minute to hear the sirens, air raid sirens going off, and then that'd be it, baby, for mankind. Well, while this was happening in the United States and Cuba, during the same time, India and China fought a war. Where else? In Aksai Chin. They actually fought a war over the border between their two countries in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. So you take that little piece of evidence, and then you think, what is going on these days, why they would build this exact recreation of this place. It just doesn't make any sense. But it turns out that, once again, the native people there have been reporting for years that this is actually a hotspot for UFO sightings, and there's a lot of evidence to back them up. Do you remember the story, Lois, about the researcher who went there and talked to the school kids that live kind of close to Aksai Chin?
Yeah, there was a drawing contest that they put out for the kids to participate in, and they said, draw something from your everyday life. So the children, many of them actually drew scenes of UFOs coming from this area. And that just speaks to the fact that these oddities are going on a regular basis there.
And the unusual thing, too, about the kids who were drawing these drawings were they live in villages that are so isolated. There are no TVs there. There's no comic books. There's no movies, nothing. They didn't have anything that would influence them to draw flying saucers. Basically, they were told, draw something that you see every day, and more than half these kids drew flying saucers. So you have that now. You have the fact that China and India fought a war over this place for absolutely no reason. It lasted a month, and then the Chinese declared victory, and then they went away. It turns out that the conditions were so, once again, inhospitable, not just to living, but in combat, that there were more soldiers on both sides that died because of the conditions, the weather conditions, frostbite and things like that, than died by shooting at each other. Also, it turns out that this area, Aksai Chin, has a long, long history of UFO sightings, not just recently. There are stories about how back in the Tibetan myths, let's say, lots of UFOs show up. There was a letter from a Belgian priest who was visiting the area in the 1600s, and he saw this thing that he compared to a Chinese hat doubled with lots of lights on it, very kind of fantastic. It circled the village where he was staying. You know, it wasn't trying to be hidden, wasn't trying to hide itself from people. People came out on the streets and looked at it. This Belgian priest couldn't believe what he was seeing. Finally, he talked to someone who was living at the monastery that he was visiting, and he said, this kind of stuff happened all the time. Right, Lois?
Right. And he wrote a letter back home to a friend, so it's documented. And this was in the 1600s. So
this part of the world, for whatever reason, you know, not many people there, but it turns out that there's a lot of UFO activity there. So now let's just kind of put all that into perspective. First of all, you had a war fought there in 1962, a war that made absolutely no sense. Secondly, the people there now say they see UFOs all the time. Third, young kids, when told to draw something that they see in everyday life, they draw UFOs. Fourth, these things have been around for years and documented evidence of people seeing them back in the 1600s. So then you go back to, okay, this question, why did the Chinese military spend all this time and money to create a 1 to 500 scale model of this very isolated place? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's so puzzling because what would it be for? It's not for them to
train
it, because what would be the reason? So it just leaves you with a lot of questions.
Right. So one of the things that might be a clue to this is a good friend, Christopher O'Brien, who's a UFO researcher. He's been on the show a number of times. He's the guy who is the expert on what's going on in the St. Louis Valley in Colorado, where people see all kinds of strange things all the time. UFOs, but also shadow people, flying humanoids, airplanes disappearing, horses and cattle being mutilated, being levitated, weird lights in cemeteries. St. Louis Valley is a very, very strange place. And what that has to displace Aksai Chin is that it is also a location of where plate tectonics, is that how you say that?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Because it's the Himalayas, it's the Asian and the Eurasian plates, and they are constantly under pressure there.
Mm-hmm. They're bumping up against each other, and that's what creates mountains of, like the Himalayas and also the Rocky Mountains. So those two places have this in common. And his, Christopher O'Brien's theory was that, and other people have said this too, is that for some reason, where these plate tectonics crash up against each other, creating mountains and all these gorges and so on. And a lot of times, a lot of people don't live near these places because they're just so inhospitable to live in or near. For some reason, lots of UFOs are seen in these areas. And his theory, I know, was that, hey, look at, there could be UFOs operating underground inside these mountains, coming out during the day, but because there's so few people around, the area actually seeing them, they can kind of come and go with immunity. Other people have, said the same things, that maybe seismic activity attracts UFOs. We don't know. But now we have to go back to the question, which we're not going to answer tonight. It's just so very odd. Why, of all places, the Chinese expected to, fight a war or train their troops in, why would they do it at this place where they fought a war in 1962, where they lost more men to the climate and the weather than they did shooting at each other. It's really a mystery, Lois.
It absolutely is, Mac, and it just makes you wonder what is really going on over there. And you talked about the seismic activity, and not only am I getting a history lesson, but a science lesson too. But that's, a lot of people talk about the areas where it's called like a veil, where there's just an opening or portal, if you will, to the outside connections, and that's where odd things like this often takes place. So
it also goes to some people who think, and I know that Switchy is one of these people who at least is interested in this theory, that UFOs might be from like the center of the earth. Maybe they're not from outer space at all. And if that was true, I mean, it's kind of far-fetched, but if that was true, this is where one of these portals would be, because these, as I say, the gorges are just so deep there because of the plate tectonics hitting up against each other, that if, you were in the middle of the earth and you needed to get out, it would probably be in one of these places.
Yeah, well, there would be an opening, that's for sure.
To me, the clearest evidence is that if you go and ask kids, and you know this because you're a teacher in your real life there, Lois, if you ask them, draw something, everyday life. I mean, what would your kids draw?
Well, they would draw them playing football. They would draw their playing video games. But everyday life would not include UFOs, not around here.
But, that it's like the innocence of them just doing what they're told to do. And all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but more than 2/3 of the kids in this particular class drew UFOs. It's just like really crazy. What? So there's just no answer to this. It's just one of those mysteries, The name of the place, again, is where they built this replica is Hangyang Tan in China. And they built it of this Haksai Chin up in the Himalayas. UFO hotbed. Strange war fought there for some reason. Lots of people see UFOs. What's the connection? We just don't know.
It's hard to say. There are no answers, just leads you to more questions.
Right.
But there's a lot of evidence that something's going on. It's not just made up, so it really makes you puzzle.
Right. So anyway, hey, listen, that was interesting, right, Lois?
It was. As I told you, we got a history lesson and a science lesson.
Maybe we should take a trip there, you and I, to Aksai Chin up in the Himalayas.
I'd like to go somewhere warmer, please.
Okay, yeah, me too. Well, you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. We'll be right back after this.
We've all heard of Area 51, the U.S. government's top secret base in the Nevada desert. But have you ever heard of Area 52 or 53 or 54? 54? How about Tonopah Test Range or the Navy's secret base inside the Bermuda Triangle? Find out about them and more in Mack Maloney's Beyond Area 51, Mysteries of the World's Most Forbidden Places. Did Richard Nixon show Jackie Gleason a crashed alien spaceship near the swamps of Florida? Is it true that more UFOs are seen over a small Scottish village than anywhere else in the world? And is there a secret place in Russia that some people think is heaven on earth? In Mack Maloney's Beyond Area 51, you'll visit more than a dozen top secret places around the globe. The haunted forests of New Jersey, a valley in Colorado where shadows come alive and humans can fly without wings. And where's the only secret base in America that's not been visited by UFOs? You've heard Mack talk all about these places on his radio show. Now you can read all about them yourself. That's Mack Maloney's Beyond Area 51, Mysteries of the World's Most Forbidden Places. Now on sale at Amazon.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. This is Mack Maloney. I'm here with the very lovely Lois Lane.
Hi, Mac. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here.
Is it really, Lois? Is it really?
Yes, of course it is. Okay. It's always good to be with you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Did I throw you off there?
We're going to be talking tonight about a topic that has been an interest of me since I was a little kid. Now, as some regular listeners of the show might know, my father was a veteran of World War II, as was your father, Lois.
Yes.
They both fought in the Pacific. My father was 4 years in the Navy, and while he was there, he developed an interest in military history. So when he came home, he started reading books about military history, and then as I was growing up, these books were around the house, and before I could read, I would pick them up and just look at the pictures, and then when I could read, I would actually read the books, and a lot of them had to do with aircraft of World War II, and that's what really got my interest in military history. So we're going to talk tonight about how some designs came out of World War II by all sides. They were trying to get, a one-up on the enemy to see if they could build in technological advances into their aircraft, which would give them an advantage over the enemy, as we said. And probably one of the most famous airplanes of World War II was the Japanese Zero fighter. Now, here's why this was such an unusual airplane. First of all, it was designed back in the late 30s, but it's almost like a design that would come out of the 50s. It was very, very much advanced, and they did a lot of things that no other aircraft designers had done before. Like, for instance, the Japanese military went to the designers and they said, this is what we want. These are the specifications for this airplane. We want it to be able to go more than 300 miles an hour, which was pretty fast in the late 30s. We want it to be able to fly up to 8 hours because the war in the Pacific, a lot of it was fought around these islands that were just strung out from Japan all the way down to Australia and to the South China Sea, vast distances between them. So you needed airplanes that could fly a long way, get into combat, and then fly a long way back. So the Japanese military wanted this Zero fighter to be able to fly for 6 to 8 hours, which was a very long time for an airplane back then. It also had to be heavily armed because if it got into combat, they wanted to make sure they won that combat and still have the airplane return home. So they put 2 machine guns on it, which a lot of airplanes back then had, but they also put 2 cannons on it, and cannons are basically, simply put, they're just large machine guns. They're the round that they shoot is much larger. Probably by comparison, it might take up to 50, 60 bullets from a machine gun to shoot down a plane, but if you hit a plane with 2 or 3 cannon shots, they make holes in it, big enough that would destroy the plane right away. So it was a very, very heavily armored airplane for its time, and it had 2 cannons, not just 1. So what they had to do is to meet these specifications is had a lot of, as I say, armament on it, had to fly a long way. And the rule of thumb in airplane design is the lighter you can make the plane, the less fuel it takes for it to fly and to go long distances. So that's what the Japanese had in mind. They said, let's make this super fighter, but we have to make it ultra, ultra light so it can fly those long distances and so on. So what they did was the designers actually took a technology from the Germans, who were their allies at the time, for this new age kind of metal called aluminum. I mean, aluminum is all around us now, but back then it was like this kind of newfangled, new technological alloy that you could build things of. It was kind of lightweight, but it had some strength to it. So they said, well, maybe the way we can do this is to build this airplane, the Japanese Zero, of aluminum, and so it can carry a lot of fuel, so it won't use a lot of fuel, but it will be able to support an engine, which was a powerful engine, to carry it the long distances and also give it an advantage when it's fighting against other planes, in the so-called dogfights. So that's what they did. They built the plane of aluminum, but they also did things like they didn't want to have a whole lot of drag on it, so the rivets were actually flush into the fuselage. And then the interior of the plane, the frame of the plane, what they did was they would carve out holes, or they'd drill out holes in the frame itself just to save on weight. And sure enough, when the thing started to fly, when they started to test it, it actually, some of them would go up to 330 miles an hour. It could climb 6 miles high. It could support these 4 guns, 2 machine guns, and 2 cannons. And as it turned out, because it was so light, it was very, very maneuverable. So if it was up against a plane that might be 10 years old, it might be able to turn 180 degrees in 10 seconds, where it would take maybe up to a minute for the older plane to do the same thing. Big advantage in a dogfight. Now, there were certain disadvantages to this kind of design. Number one, there was no armor at all on the plane. Now, in most warplanes, what they do is they put armor, first of all, around the cockpit to protect the pilot, to stop any bullets or any kind of ordnance coming in on him. Also, they would put armament around the fuel tanks, and they had these things called self-sealing fuel tanks that if there was a hole in the fuel tanks, they were actually inside a rubber bladder. They had this kind of epoxy in there, and the epoxy would fill up the hole and would self-seal the fuel tank, which would, save the fuel, but it would also cut down the chances that the airplane would catch on fire. None of that was in the Japanese Zeros. No protection at all for the pilot, no protection at all for the fuel tanks. So what happened was if you were able to get 1 to 2 shots into a Japanese Zero, if you were able to catch it, if you were able to outmaneuver it, it would really just explode into a ball of flame. It's a philosophy that we did not share with the Japanese. Basically, the pilot was not worth as much as winning the war or winning the dogfight or winning the combat. In the Western philosophy, they did everything they could to protect the pilots, to see if they could bring them home alive. The Japanese philosophy at the time was just the opposite. So you had this very lightweight, very maneuverable, fast plane with all these guns on it. But the person flying it, if something happened, it was just, they were out of luck. That's just the way it went. So the Japanese military bought these planes and bought a lot of them. Now, the other disadvantage of it was that this was actually a plane that the Japanese Navy wanted. So they had to operate. The original intention was for them to operate from aircraft carriers. And what that means is that the wings have to be shorter. So because on aircraft carriers, storage is the prime thing. You have to be able to jam and store as many airplanes on the carrier as you can, so they can't have really long wings. That changed later on in the war when the Japanese military started flying them from land bases. But that was a disadvantage for the Zero. But that was one of the few things. Other than that, it wasn't really survivable if it got caught on the wrong side of a dogfight. But for the first 2 years, it was so much more technologically advanced over Allied fighters that at one point there was a 12-to-1 kill ratio, meaning for every Zero our side shot down, they shot down 12 of our planes. Wow. That's how technologically advanced the Japanese Zero was. And, for a while, the Americans, the Allied cause, didn't know how they were going to, counter this. Now, a couple things kind of happened which turned the tide in the Allies' favor. First of all, in 1942, the Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. It's the first and only time that the Japanese actually set foot on territory that belonged to the United States. Now, they did this as kind of a diversionary tactic while they were trying to take over Midway and other islands further down in the Pacific, down the South Pacific. But there was this small little war up there, and during it, a Japanese Zero pilot had to crash land his plane. He survived, he got out, but he left the plane behind. So later on, American forces found this almost intact Japanese Zero, and this is the first time that they had a chance to get their hands on one. They sent it to a air base in the United States where engineers pulled it apart, and now all of a sudden they're finding out the secrets of this thing. They found out that the reason it was so maneuverable and so fuel efficient, let's say, is that, as we were saying before, it was made of just this thin aluminum. There was no armor weighing it down around the pilot, no armor around the fuel tanks, nothing. And I just wanted to, just as an example, the thickness of the aluminum that they used in the Japanese Zero was 0.02 millimeters, okay? For everyone here in the United States, that is approximately the width of a cereal box, the cardboard in a cereal box. You know what I mean, Lois?
I do.
Okay, it's nothing. You can just barely put your two fingers together to show what 0.2 millimeters are, but that's all the protection that the Japanese pilot had, and which was no protection at all. Our American fighters, Allied fighters, were made of much thicker material, much thicker metal, and they were also armored. Now, because, just as an aside, because they were armored and that they were that the metal was thicker than the aluminum on the Japanese fighter, the Americans had to give more powerful engines to their airplanes so they could fly the long distance, so they could, hopefully win in combat, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now they have this Japanese Zero in their hands, and these engineers pulled it apart, put it back together, flew it and started flying it against our own Allied aircraft and figured out, okay, what's the best way to beat a Japanese Zero in combat? And no one had ever been able to figure this out before. So one of the things they found, though, first of all, is they told American pilots, do not get in a dogfight with a Japanese Zero because he's always going to beat you because they can turn quicker, they're much more maneuverable, and they have a lot of firepower. So what they would do is they would fly, the American airplanes would fly very, very high. They would look for Japanese Zeros below them. They would dive on them, shoot them as they're diving, and then just get out of there. It was called zoom and zoom. And this actually worked, but the thing is that you had to be in an advantaged spot to actually see Japanese Zeros flying below you. And remember, the Japanese Zero could fly 6 miles high. So another maneuver that they came up with was invented by this pilot, and his name was Thatch, as it turned out. So they called it the Thatch Weave, which to me sounds like some kind of a, I don't know.
Like a hairdo?
Like a hairdo or something, or putting together like a blanket or something,
Oh,
you know?
yeah, sure.
Thatch Weave, anyway. And what this was is that you would have two American planes flying side by side, the flight leader and the wingman. If a Japanese Zero happened to get on the tail of one of the planes, which is your most vulnerable spot, what they would do is they would start weaving in and out of each other. They would head for each other and weave in and out, in and out. So what that means is if the Japanese Zero stayed on the tail of the first plane, eventually he would come across, he'd crisscross the second American plane, and the second American plane would have him in his gun sights and shoot him down. Okay, so that was a system, that was a tactic that gave the Americans an advantage. The problem is that you need two airplanes to defeat one Japanese plane. Okay, so eventually, what really happened was, even though the Japanese Zero was this kind of really far out, advanced technological airplane for the time, what it made the Americans do was, as I said before, build these more powerful airplanes, more armored airplanes that had more guns on them and cannons. One of them was the Hellcat, which was a carrier-based plane. And once Hellcats kind of got into the air, got into the war, then this whole kill ratio started to come down, not in the Japanese favor, but in our favor. And all of a sudden, now we're shooting them down. We shoot down 10 of theirs for one of ours. Okay, so the tide started to turn, and then as the war, kind of got towards its conclusion, 1944, 1945, here were these Japanese Zeros, which just a couple years before was like the state-of-the-art airplane. The Japanese were so desperate that they started using them as kamikazes. They took the machine guns and the cannons off of them. They loaded them with bombs, and they basically instructed their pilots to be armed drones. And with suicide attacks, kamikaze attacks, would fly right into American ships. A very desperate tactic, but, once again, that was their philosophy. And so the tide turned, and by the end, 44, 45, the Japanese Zero, as I said, which was this kind of shining example just a few years ago of, this unbelievably advanced aircraft. Basically, now they're using them as kind of drones, kind of steered drones on suicide missions.
That's fascinating. And to think of all the advances that it led to just because everybody was trying to outdo one another.
Mm-hmm. Right. One more other thing, an interesting story about the Japanese Zero. And it really has nothing to do with airplanes, as it turns out. Now, on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the Americans shot down 30 planes, 30 airplanes. Some of them were Zeros. And what someone noticed somewhere along the line was that when one of these Japanese Zeros crashed, the entire plane would just, because we were talking about how combustible it is, would just, burn away, except the propeller. And no one really knew why. Now, at the same time, our submarines were basically the only line of defense we had against the Japanese for about 6 months after the war started, because a lot of our ships in Pearl Harbor had been sunk, and the aircraft carriers weren't up to snuff, and they were kind of protecting the aircraft carriers. So to bring the war to Japan, we only had our submarines. The problem is that the torpedoes that our submarines were using, a lot of them turned out to be duds. And the reason was because the firing pin and the head of the torpedo and the wallhead of the torpedo was made of this very brittle metal, and it would actually snap off before it would reach its target. So a lot of them were duds. And the problem was if you are in a submarine, a U.S. submarine, and you fire a torpedo at a Japanese warship and it's a dud, you give your position away and they're going to sink you. Okay, so it's like double trouble. And the first 6 months of the war, a lot of our submarines were lost just for that reason. Now, why didn't they fix the warhead on these torpedoes? It's a whole other show. But it turns out, and I don't know if you can believe this or not, Lois, but there were some admirals in the U.S. Navy in America, nowhere near the combat zone, who were allegedly on the take from the people who were making these torpedoes, and they refused to change the firing pin in it. Yeah, I mean,
it's disgraceful.
It's disgraceful, but these things happen. It's how it is to believe. So what happened was the people at Pearl Harbor, without telling these big admirals and so on, they said, why is this Japanese Zero propeller, why does it survive when the rest of the plane burns away when they're shot down and crash? So they actually took one of the propellers, they ground it down and made a bunch of the firing pins from it. And it turned out it was the propeller, like the rest of the Japanese Zero, was made of aluminum, but it was actually kind of like reinforced aluminum. And so they make these firing pins out of the Japanese propellers, put them in the American torpedoes, and what happens? They don't break, and all of a sudden our success with the torpedoes goes through the roof. Okay, it's too bad that that's the way they had to come upon the answer to this, but that's what happened. And when that happened, the tide in the naval battles of the Pacific really started to turn in our favor, because now we had torpedoes that actually worked, and it all came from the propeller of this really advanced Japanese Zero. They helped us. Their technology actually helped us beat them in the war. Isn't that strange?
It's really amazing just to think that somebody noticed that and then took it upon themselves to then almost reverse engineer it to say, wow, and what can we do with this?
Right.
And they put those pieces together.
Right. Someone just, the thought just came into their mind. Why does the propeller survive the plane crash? Why doesn't it burn up? Well, it's just a little bit stronger than the rest of the plane. They thought, hey, why don't we try these in our torpedoes? Bada bing, they worked.
Wow. It's amazing.
It is amazing. So anyway, as I said earlier at the beginning of the segment, both of our fathers fought in World War II, and I think that's amazing now. My father, as I said, was there for 4 years. He was on a ship in the Pacific. But your father, we've talked about this on the show many times, your father was in the Marines, and he was actually the youngest Marine to land on Okinawa, the last big battle of World War II.
That is true. And the only reason I know that is because he told you way later. He never talked about it with any of us. We didn't know anything until one day he just opened up to you, and it was eye-opening for the rest of my family. Yeah,
he had some real... I guess you call them horror stories from when he was on Okinawa, because Okinawa was just this horrible battle, the last battle of World War II. And here he is. He's a kid. And he's running around with machine guns. And he says it was just awful. It was just like a nightmare. And the Okinawa landings took place on April 1st. And it was also Easter Sunday. And one of the things he said was when he was on the landing craft heading into the beach, he thought to himself, well, on one hand, it's Easter Sunday, so, God might be looking down on me. But on the other hand, it's April Fool's.
That's very much him, that he'd say something like that.
And who knows, So, so just interesting stories, and I might as well tell this part, too, is so after the Battle of Okinawa was over, and the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs in Japan and ended the war, he went to Japan for about 6 months as kind of an occupation for us. And then he went back to the United States, and they made him do his senior year in high school, right?
Yes, they did. They said, and the thing that really got him was he had to repeat that, but they thought he was too old to play on the baseball team.
He says, all I want to do is play on the baseball team. And they said, you're too much of a man to play on the baseball team. So he actually did his senior year with kids who, didn't even know where Japan or Okinawa was, yet he had gone through all that. Finished his senior year, didn't play baseball, but went on to college and was an English high school teacher for a long time, right, Joe?
Absolutely.
Right, Lois?
Absolutely. Correcting my grammar all the way through.
Well, that's why you have such beautiful grammar there.
Exactly.
So anyway, well, there you go. Warplanes of World War II, strange stories about warplanes of World War II. Maybe we'll do similar segments in the future. So look, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a commercial break now? And we'll be right back after this. You're listening to Mack Maloney's Military Lifestyle Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. We'll be right back.
UFOs are found in Renaissance art, on ancient coins, and etched on cave walls. They're even reported in the Bible. But more surprising is when UFOs are seen the most, in times of war. Through centuries, thousands of UFO sightings have been made by high-ranking officials, military pilots, and ordinary soldiers. Often, these fantastic appearances occur at the height of great battles. From World War I to D-Day, to Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, military investigators are baffled. Why do UFO sightings spike so drastically during wartime? Could it be mistaken aircraft, or is someone, or something, looking in on us? In UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, Mack Maloney chronicles centuries of these incredible sightings and tries to solve the puzzle of why so many UFOs are seen while humanity is at war. Read about the scare ships, the ghost planes, and the ghost rockets, alien giants in the jungles of Vietnam, UFOs controlling our ICBM bases, dogfights with flying saucers during the Gulf War, and more. 300 pages of unbelievable stories, along with many startling photographs. That's UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, by Mack Maloney. On sale at your local bookstore or on Amazon.com.
X-Files Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. This is Mack Maloney doing a special show tonight. In the studio with us is the lovely Lois Lane.
Hi, Mac. Hi, everybody. It's been quite a fun night, hasn't it?
It has been a fun night, and it's not even over yet. So now the staff tells me that you have a surprise for me. Is that it?
Well, yes. I hope you're ready. You're going to be a little bit on the hot seat. Oh. Can you handle it?
I hope so.
So what's been going on is over the past few months, fans have been writing in and asking questions, and we've been collecting them. And we thought, what a great time to just put you on the hot seat.
Questions about what?
Questions about you. They want to know about Mac.
Oh, my goodness. No. Yes, I'm surprised. Thank you, staff.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing now for this segment?
Yes.
Okay.
We thought this would be the best time to, because inquiring minds want to know more about Mack Maloney.
Where's my Jenny Ice? Here it is.
You down that because you've got a little while here. We've got a whole bunch of questions.
Well, we can record it. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to run it, but let's see what happens. Okay?
Well, we'll see. All right. So the very first thing that has come up numerous times is people want to know, is Mack Maloney your real name? I know that's a simple yes or no question.
Right.
But.
Let me just answer it this way, okay? Everyone on the show does not use their real name. Is that the right way to say that? No one on the show uses their real name. We all have aliases.
Oh, well, that's very intriguing. So everybody's got a secret life going on? That's so.
I wouldn't make that leap there, Lois. We just have stage names. That's all.
Well, it's sort of like, an alternate.
Okay. So the answer is Mack Maloney is actually my stage name for the show.
Okay. So where did that name come from?
Okay. That's question number 2.
It's a follow-up.
Okay. It is my pen name. I've been writing books for more than 20 years, and the first book that I wrote, the editor called me up. The book was in. It was printed, ready to go, but he said to me, well, listen, we need a pen name for you. No one had mentioned this in the year I've been working on this thing. No one mentioned to me that they were going to use anything other but my real name. And now he gives me 5 minutes to come up with a pen name. So as it turns out that one half of my family's name is Maloney, so that was kind of natural. But then I walked into, I was working at General Electric at the time, and I just didn't know what I could use as a first name. I went into a colleague's office, and can't make this stuff up, folks. He was in the process of mailing a pair of women's underwear to a girlfriend of his through the GE mail, I might add, basically with a note thinking of you. And her name was Mac. And I said, what are you doing? He explained it to me. He says, her name is Mack Maloney. That's how it happened.
Here's the other part of that. I believe there's an interesting reason why your editor wanted you to have a pen name.
Right. As the way he explained it to me, I might have said this on the show before, but they said, well, because the books I started out doing, the Wingman books, on sale everywhere, by the way, number 21 coming out very soon, they were a series. So I was actually contracted to write 3 of them. And as he put it, he says, well, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, we'd want to bring someone else in to write the last 2 books, and we wouldn't want to change the name. And that's why they needed a pen name. So,
just in case. Just in case we want to keep the Wingman series going. So on the subject of Wingman, a lot of your audience knows that you're the author of those books. And so they were wondering, is Hawk Hunter based on you?
You mean the fighter pilot who drives around in a Corvette, has ESP, and is the best fighter pilot to ever live? Is he based on me?
Yes.
No, he isn't. You know, not even close to Lois, right?
So while we're on the subject of planes, what is your favorite plane? Do you have one?
Good question. Good question. Well, Wingman flies an F-16, so I've been writing about F-16s for more than 20 years. Very cool plane, kind of like a hot rod jet fighter, still around. And U.S. Air Force flies them, also a number of countries around the world. Just a very cool little kind of hot rod jet fighter. I like that one a lot. I like the P-51 Mustang from World War II, one of the coolest planes ever built. The Spitfire, the British Spitfire that helped win the Battle of Britain, also a very cool plane. The F-86 Saberjet from the 50s, really kind of a 50s kind of hot rod type jet fighter. So I guess I have a bunch of them, yes.
So it's interesting that you keep mentioning sort of a hot rod, fast plane. That's what you seem to like. So some people want to know, what is your favorite car? And now I want to know, do you have a Corvette?
I don't have a Corvette. My favorite car is a 2009 Honda 4-door. No. If I had a choice, if I had to pick a car, I would pick some kind of Corvette, I guess, even though people would accuse me of having a midlife crisis. I could just drive around with you, Lois, with the top down and put an end to that. But Corvettes have intrigued me for a long time. Jaguars, I guess, I don't know. But if I had to pick one, I would say it would be a Corvette. Second place would be some kind of a vintage Thunderbird, maybe. The early Thunderbirds were really cool looking, I thought, too.
Oh, yeah. I definitely agree with that. I would take a vintage Thunderbird in a second. And actually, those new models that came out, I don't remember what year that was, but they sort of reissued a variation of the old ones, and I loved those. All right, so what kind of Corvette does Hawk drive?
He actually drives a Firebird, as it turns out.
You said Corvette.
No, well, I was just making that up.
Oh, okay.
I was vamping, as they say in the business. No, it's only mentioned in one of the books. I'm going to say maybe book 4 or 5, where he is driving around in 83 Firebird, which at the time I had an 83 Firebird sports car. But
I was wondering where you got that idea.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, you might have to update that.
Yes, right.
So what was your very first car, Mac? People would really like to know.
Well, it wasn't a Corvette, that's for sure. It was a 1963 Chevy Bel Air. It was kind of gold-colored, had 4 doors, 6-cylinder, automatic. It was the ugliest, most, kind of family car that you can get, especially 4 doors. When I was growing up, if you had a 4-door car, man, you're a loser. You needed a 2-door car to be cool. And it was years later that I actually got a 2-door car. But anyway, 63 Chevy Bel Air. Second car was the 62 Chevy Bel Air. I bought the first one for $200, and I bought the second one for $125, and I had them both for about a year or so. It's good cars to start off in because, when you hit things here along the way, you don't want to be denting your Corvette, right?
Absolutely. You want to preserve that. Wow. Okay, so we know a little bit more about Mac and his cars and Mac and his planes. So people are wondering, they know that you have kind of an interest in movies. You've had Gary Olson on the show a few times, and he reviews movies. And I don't know if people know that you studied film.
Oh, I mention it all the time on the air that I have a degree in filmmaking.
Okay, well, there you go.
Edison College.
So people are wondering about your favorite movie. Do you have a favorite movie of all time, or would you have to narrow it down to your top 5?
It might not be top 5, but I do have a number of them. Okay, my favorite movie of all time is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Sergio Leone. The music is done by Ennio Morricone. 3.5-hour Western that an Italian director, Italian film crew, they filmed it in Spain with American actors, basically put Clint Eastwood on the map. It's just this incredible story with all these like little stories sewn into it, and it's just a great movie. 3.5 hours long. That's my favorite movie.
Does it stand the test of time? Could you still watch it now?
Yes, for sure. I've probably watched it maybe 20 times over the years. This is the full. You have to watch the full length version. It's odd because it's like an anti-war movie. It's it was back. I think it was done in '69. It's an anti-war movie. It's a love story. It's a lot of things rolled into one because it's an Italian point of view on what American Western is. It's not exactly what American Westerns are, but it's like an American Western told through a European point of view. It really just a great movie.
Wow. Well,
even though Clint Eastwood is in it, and he's a mushhead, but back then he was good, and he doesn't have very many lines, so he doesn't screw up the movie, with bad acting. But just a super duper movie. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the long version.
I can't believe you're saying anything bad about Clint Eastwood. So you would highly recommend that, and Westerns have never been an interest of mine, but you've just piqued my interest a little bit that I might actually want to see that someday.
My second movie, this won't be a favorite movie, this won't be a surprise to you, is To Kill a Mockingbird, which is just a great movie, and great for so many different reasons. And great story, great acting, Gregory Peck. Really tells the story about what was happening down south in that era. And but the strange thing too, it's almost and not a ghost movie, but there are elements in it of people who are kind of invisible until the very end, and yet their presence hangs over the story in a very strange but very cool way. And another thing too is I think the music was done by Elmer Bernstein. Switchy will probably correct me on that, but there are parts of that movie where you could take the soundtrack and just put it on a Twilight Zone and it would fit perfectly. It was just that kind of creepy kind of sci-fi music that just goes so well with this movie, which is about, the bad state of race relations back in the 50s down south.
Absolutely. Wow, that another interesting one.
Well, I went to film school, Lois.
You did. Wow, we are getting another education.
I learned something, I guess.
It's also a great book, but do you want to tell us about more movies you love?
It's a book?
Yes, we can read.
Let's see. I don't know. The Shawshank Redemption is a great movie.
The Usual Suspects.
Usual Suspects is also a really good movie. I'll tell you, a really funny movie is Mad World. I mean, it's 60s, but it's just a really kind of funny movie because there's a lot of funny comedians in it. I mean, I could go on and on, but, if I had to watch 5 movies on an island, I think there'd be those 5.
Well, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned my top one.
Go ahead.
Because you love it too. The Princess Bride.
Oh, The Princess Bride, yes, of course.
Because that's a perfect movie from beginning to end.
We all love that movie, don't we, guys?
Absolutely.
Okay, me too. Yeah, okay.
Well, and I'm going to plug another one. It's old, but it was hilarious. The Adventures of Babysitting.
Okay, all right.
Okay, now
Is this 10 questions for Lois or for
Sorry. All right, so people are wondering a little bit about the show and the process of putting that together.
Oh.
How long does it take you?
Wow, good question. Well, it takes us, we have to do 2 hours every week. We record on Tuesday nights. We do it from WXEX in Exeter, New Hampshire. one of the stations owned by Pistol Pete. His network stretches throughout New England. It's a great place to be. You've been there, Lois. Isn't it a nice place? It's
really nice. Very subdued and set back, and oddly enough, set in kind of a neighborhood, but it's a great location.
It is a great location, and they you've heard us say this many times. They just couldn't treat us better there. We're friends with the people who run it. We have a lot of fun there. So anyway, we record there for 2 hours Tuesday nights. Now, to record 2 hours usually probably takes about 3 hours just to get everything set up, to get the guests on the air, to talk to them a little bit before we start the show. And then what happens the next day is I will listen to the show Wednesday morning, and I will log it, basically saying where the edits should be. That takes a while, so I get to listen to the show again, and then I send that to the editor, whose name is Evan Wallace, who just happens to be the son of Martin Wallace, who does UFO podcasts. We're good friends with him. We're all kind of in the same part of the world. And then it takes him a few days to edit it, and that's he will send it to me for broadcast the following week. So, total amount of hours, I'm going to say from beginning to end, maybe 10 to 12 hours a week, though it might seem longer than that, right, Lois? You've been involved.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Right.
And what is the most surprising thing about doing this show for you?
How many times I can pick up the check and Juan just kind of disappears? That's one of them. The thing is it's a good question. I'm surprised how popular it is. We just, I think, passed 83,000 downloads, and we only started that about 2 years ago. So, that's a pretty big number. I'm just surprised that so many people are just regular listeners. We're also on 7 radio stations around the world. But I guess the most surprising thing is that fans actually write to us and ask us questions like these. I'm surprised by the fan reaction and how, in many ways, the fans kind of share something in common while they listen to the show, but they're from literally all over the world. I mean, we have a lot of fans in Canada, certainly, and in the United States, and in England, because we hear from people from those countries all the time. But we get letters from people in Germany. We got letters from people in Luxembourg, Liechtenstein. We got a letter the other day, from a guy in Cairo. People down in New Zealand and Australia. So I guess I'm most surprised that we're so popular literally around the world, and that people take the time and write to us and tell us what they think about the show.
Yeah. Well, they're very interested in all the personalities on the show, I imagine. You've kept it very lively.
Well, that's what they mention the most. I mean, maybe I'm telling too many tales out of school here, but when we get email, very rarely does it say, we like that report on Bigfoot and flying saucers, or we like that report on, UFOs during the Korean War. What they do is that they just say that they like to hear us get together every week, and it sounds like they're at a party with us. And I love that idea.
Yes, party it is. And on that note, how did you and Juan meet? Everyone wants to know.
Well, we were at a party. No. What happened was my computer, I was in the middle of a deadline. This is going back some time. And I was in the middle of a deadline, and my computer just completely seized up with probably 2/3 of a book in it. And, it's due in 2 weeks or whatever. And I asked my neighbor at the time. He had told me that some guy had just straightened out his computer problems. And I said, listen, I need someone to come and look at this right away. So he gave me this number, and probably 2 hours later, this guy named Juan shows up at the door. And he came upstairs and looked at my computer, fixed it in probably 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes tops. But then we spent the next hour and 50 minutes talking about Keith Richards and the Rolling Stone. And because we both had music in common, he knows a lot about music. I picked up a lot about music along the way, but we just kind of had that thing in common, okay? So he really did stay for 2 hours just talking about music. I'm thinking, boy, doesn't he have anywhere else to go? But, apparently not. And And so then he fixed it. It was great. Then I got the bill, and he charged me for 2 hours. So he actually charged me for talking to him about Keith Richards. Okay,
That's not true.
It is absolutely true.
Oh, my goodness, Juan.
Yeah, Juan. Go ahead.
Juan. Well, and so after being charged for 2 hours of chatting, I'm surprised you kept the relationship up.
Well, he's just one of these guys, and I know a lot of people like him on the air because of how he sounds, very kind of smooth and cool, but he is an interesting guy. I've never met anyone like Juan, Juan. He's a very, I don't know, how would you describe him? You've met him. Very smooth, but very kind of...
Well, he just has so many interesting stories, too. Mm-hmm. Like, he's done a lot of things in his life.
Yeah, for sure.
So he surprises you very often with something else. You say, oh, well, I was there, or I did this.
Yeah.
And you're like, really? How many lives have you had?
Right,
is the question we often think.
And he's, someone used the word, he's without guile. And I think I had to kind of look it up. And it just means that, he's not like a threat to anybody. He's not... Like, I walk into a bar room, and I'm always looking, okay, who's going to start the fight with me this time? But no one ever gives him, he says anything to anybody, and no one ever takes it the wrong way.
Very genuine.
Yeah, very genuine. Yeah.
That is Juan.
Juan.
Sorry, JJ.
Go ahead.
Well, on that note, you mentioned music, so I know he is a big Rolling Stones fan. And do you have a favorite Stone?
Yeah, I mean, Keith Richards is, he's, I don't want to say he's a hero of mine, but I admire him because he, grew up playing the guitar and, following in the footsteps of people like Muddy Waters and B.B. King and all these old blues players that he just admired over the years. And what has happened is that now he has turned into one of these guys. He has become what his heroes were, and not many people are able to do that, and he's still at it. And I know that a lot of people say, how's this guy still alive? It turns out that he has, because I read his autobiography, he has longevity in his DNA. At one point, he had 4 siblings in their 90s. He was like the youngest of the family.
Wow.
So he's going to be around for a long time. And he has no pretenses about who he is at all. He's a guy, just happens to be in like the biggest band around for the past 50 years next to the Beatles. And he's never changed. He just seems to be a guy that if he was just getting $100 to play at your local bar, he'd be just as happy. So maybe I'm just being too Pollyanna on this, but I admire him in a way.
And have you always felt like that, or has Juan convinced you of that?
Juan has brainwashed me of that. The thing is that I was never a real big Stones fan, but when they were touring there a couple of years ago, he talked me into going with him to go see them. They're playing at Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play, about an hour from where we are. And I hemmed and hawed, and because the ticket prices were like way, way up there. But he said to me, well, if you don't see them now, when are you going to see them? And that made sense. And I really wanted to go for 2 reasons. I never saw the Beatles, and I'm a big Beatles fan. I thought, well, this is the second best thing because they were the second biggest band, and they're the biggest band now around because the Beatles are no longer with us. But so I thought that too, and I thought I want to know if it's just all hype or not. You can see them playing in videos, live, but you really can't tell. You have to go see a band live yourself to see if they live up to the hype. And, for years, the Rolling Stones were saying, the world's greatest rock band and everything. And I just wanted to know. So, we shelled out some dough. We went, and we were 40 rows back from the stage. So we were really right up there. And 65,000 people in the stadium, sold out. And they came out and they started playing. I don't even remember what song it was. But really, 20 seconds in, I just turned to Juan and I said, they're great. They're great. You could just tell they were great, and they are great. For 2.5 hours, it was just like this nonstop nonstop hits. Every song's a hit. Every song, they don't play it, note for note, but they improve on all of them. And just the way they put on the show and the way they sound, and they're all in their 70s. They're running up and down the stage. I'm out of breath watching these guys. It was just an amazing, amazing experience in my life, and I'm just glad that he talked me into going.
Yeah, high energy, sounds like.
Yep.
Yeah. So you have talked about the Beatles before on your show, and people are wondering, do you have a favorite Beatle?
No, I don't. No, I really don't. I mean, I think George Harrison was an interesting guy. He was probably the most normal of them all. Ringo, also kind of low-key, but just kind of like a normal guy. Paul McCartney and John Lennon, I mean, they were just like, they're almost like aliens from another planet, because what they did has never been replicated. Everyone's always trying to beat the Beatles, but you never do. They wrote 178 songs. Most of them were hits, sold billions of records, enjoyed by so many people. And the other thing that I know I've mentioned before is that when you read like biographies of these rock stars, almost to a person, they say, well, the reason I'm playing rock and roll is because they saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, February 9th, 1964. Saw them playing, saw the way they looked, saw the girl screaming at them, and they said, this is what I want to do, and I'm no different, but that happened to millions and millions of people that night, and seeing the Beatles, during the 7 years they were together. And I just think of how many people, because of the Beatles, became musicians, learned how to play guitar, wrote songs, just brought music, knowing music into their lives. That has to be also in the millions and millions. How many people they inspired just to write music, write songs, write poetry. It's incalculable. Yeah. So that's why I like all four of them. As a unit, they did this together. Yeah,
they really are an amazing group of people who accomplished something nobody else has ever done. And as you said, have touched so many people and made an impact on the world that, can't be replicated. But so I don't have a nice segue for this next question,
well, let's
except
try this.
So switching from music. Oh, and how funny that switching came up in my phrasing, because people are wondering, you're always asking Switch about his breakfast. And people are wondering, do you have a favorite breakfast? That is one of the questions about breakfast.
I think we talked about this just a couple weeks ago. I've been eating the same breakfast for at least...
But that's not your favorite.
No, but for at least 5 years, would you say I've been eating the same breakfast every day? Is it 5? Around. It's closing in on 5. And basically it is one piece of toast, a very thin spread of peanut butter drizzled with honey. And that's what I've eaten for
quite a few years.
Quite a few years. Do I have a favorite breakfast?
But is that your favorite? I mean, if you got to choose. I mean, you listen to Switch talk about his smorgasbord of breakfast. And I know you're drooling when he does. So
I'm drooling now.
What is it that you would like?
Well, pancakes. I'm a big pancake guy. Okay, pancakes. If I had, what I would like.
Let people want to know. Spread it. You paint a picture of your meal.
Okay.
Your breakfast.
Okay. I'm the type of person who would rather eat in a diner than a fancy Paris restaurant. Would you say that's true there, Lois?
Oh, without a doubt.
Okay. I would get 2 pancakes, hash browns. I suppose I would get some kind of, bacon, a pork product, maybe sausages. Okay. What else did they throw on those things? A lot of ketchup, of course.
Ketchup?
Yeah. Oh, a couple of scrambled eggs. See, I'm describing what Switch eats every Tuesday. And no wonder we make a big deal out of it. We're living through him vicariously.
I think that's what it is. So back to the main topic of the show, which is UFOs. People are wondering, have you ever seen a UFO?
No, I haven't. Now, you and I have had a couple of experiences. One down in Florida. If you remember, we pulled over to the side of the road and we saw the lights going overhead.
Oh, my goodness, yes. We just watched for such a long time as they slowly slowly
In formation,
just in
yeah.
a total formation, and
Other
it was
people
just-
stopped, and they were looking at the same thing. And I know one of those people said they thought they were Chinese
lanterns.
lanterns.
Yep.
But then we actually called the airport the next day, and other people had seen it, but they said they definitely weren't Chinese lanterns. But it wasn't like it was. They were just lights in the sky, you know.
Well, I don't think it was Chinese lanterns
I don't think so.
because we have since seen them, because
Right.
that is something people like to do around here in, let's say, you know, the warmer weather. People might set those off, and they didn't do what these lights did.
I mean, these lights stayed in formation. There's about a dozen to 15 of them, and they literally stayed in formation, which you hear a lot of UFO reports are like that. But you know, they were basically lights in the sky. And the other time I can remember, hopefully you can remember too, we were down the beach. I've told this story on the show before, and we were watching the big waves down on the shore that day, and we were standing on that boardwalk, and we saw these lights coming across the marsh, the Ipswich marshes. And I remember saying to you, this is it, we're going to see a UFO, because it was like blinking amber, green, and white lights, very low, acting very odd. And then they flew over us, and they were medevac helicopters going to the hospital.
Yes, I do.
And it was interesting because I've said before, you know, if they were 100 feet away from us, we would have said, hey, we saw 2 UFOs. I mean, so it's easy to see how people mistake odd things flying as being UFOs.
Mm-hmm. And people are wondering, what would you do if you actually had an encounter of some kind?
I don't know what I'd do. I don't think it's going to happen to me because I think it only happens to certain people, and I'm not one of them. I would like to see them. I would like to see one. I would like to go through the experience that a lot of people say they go through when they see it, but I just don't think it's in the cards for me. I don't know why, but I just don't think I'll ever see one.
Yeah, that makes sense, though, because you're so tuned into it, too. It's sort of like that a watched pot never boils.
Right, yeah. If you're looking for them, you never see them.
Exactly.
You know, that's the thing.
That does make sense. So we do have one more question, and this I saved this for last because I thought it was the most, very interesting.
Okay.
What is something about you that would surprise your audience?
How much time do we have? What's something about me that would surprise the audience?
They wouldn't expect this about you, to find this out, that they don't already know, too.
Okay. Does this include wearing your underwear? Or?
Oh, my gosh,
Wait,
please.
Hang on. Hold on. Wait. I don't know. I mean, I like cars. I like race cars. People, I tell you, I was thinking of something earlier today, and I'll tell you something that fascinates me. I'm not interested in it, but the fact that it exists fascinates me. It's the whole world of fashion, as odd as that might seem. Okay, where you see it on TV, and there's in dozens of magazines, and there's this whole world of fashion.
I think you mean high fashion is the
fashion.
thing that puzzles you, because you do
Right.
ask an awful lot when you see those shots of those models who look very angry,
Yes.
strutting down a runway wearing something that looks like it's a ping pong table on their back.
Ping pong table, very famous, yeah.
That's shiny, and you think, how does that convert into something someone would wear?
Very popular in the spring collection of 1919. No, I mean 2019. I know, that's what I mean. I mean, you see people come out, like I say, these models, they're always angry. They look like they haven't eaten for years. They look like they've been in jail. They look unwashed. They have blackened eyes. And they're wearing something that looks like a sackcloth. And it goes for like $20,000, you know? And I always think to myself, well, where are people wearing these things, okay? Is there some party that we will be invited to someday, and there'll be someone in a ping pong dress, and there'll be someone in like a prison dress? And what kind of parties are these people going to? And then where does that translate? Someone once said to me, well, the reason they do that is then, other manufacturers knock off, what they see in these collections that they do every spring and fall. And then it kind of trickles down until, someone is buying it at Walmart or something. And I can see that happening in some cases, but I've yet to see a ping pong dress sold, at Walmart. And I just don't get that. And I knew someone, one of my editors, his sister worked for Cosmopolitan, and they're involved in a lot of kind of photo shoots and stuff like that. And he told me that she said that they handle these dresses and that look like sackcloths and ping pong tables. They handle them like they're the golden fleece, like they're made of gold. They have like special cars deliver them and stuff. They're that valuable. But to who and why? And why does everyone make such a big deal out of this woman who goes around with the sunglasses there, in winter or something like that, and she's like this person that people look on as a god. And if you go to a party and she's there and you're not wearing like the right ribbon in your hair or the right nylon stockings or something, you're ostracized forever. It's a crazy business. I just don't understand why it's given that much gravitas.
Well, considering you're somebody who only wears black shirts and black pants, I can understand your questions. I also don't get it myself, but I think it's in the line of art, sort of like modern art, and people don't always understand that either. But, well, Mack, thank you so much for all your time.
That wasn't too bad. Okay.
No, we really didn't. We'll have to, maybe audience members will send in even more, maybe more. Okay. Probing questions so we can really get down and dirty with
That'll have to be a Mack down and dirty. Like, hell, Lois. This definitely would be a Mack After Dark then.
There you go. So we have the next Mack After Dark already planned. So audience members, please keep sending in the questions.
Do you really want to say that?
I do, because this was loads of fun.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody's going to think so when they're listening to
Probably listening to the basketball game at this point. But anyway, thank you, Lois, for coming up and surprising me with those. I appreciate it. Well. And why don't we do this? Why don't we take a commercial break now, if we have any sponsors left, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Mack Maloney.
We won't have any fashion.
No fashion, yeah, right. I don't think Cosmo is.
I think they've all dropped off now.
You're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. We'll be right back after this.
I was in the hospital with my son for 18 months.
When he got injured, I wasn't prepared, but I knew I had to be strong.
When I was told about John's injury, I was in complete shock. I just remember rushing into his room and giving him a big hug and letting him know I was there.
These veterans and families are just a few of the heroes we serve at Homes for Our Troops. For thousands of severely injured veterans, everyday life is filled with barriers.
It was really the little things throughout the house. Counters that you can't roll up to.
How to drag my wheelchair down steps.
I want to help, but he is so determined.
At Homes for Our Troops, we build specially adapted custom homes with features like wheelchair access, roll-in showers, and automatic door openers that allow them to function independently and focus on their recovery and family.
This house is freedom.
It's hope. It's a new beginning.
This house has given me my family back.
To learn more, visit hfotusa.org.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. Wow, this is Mack Maloney. What a show we have for you tonight. But, this is a special show because on the line with us is like one of my favorite authors. She's written one of my favorite books, and I'm holding the book in my hand, and I'm telling you, it's so dog-eared, and it has so many like index cards sticking out of it, you can barely see it. But it's Sharon Weinberger, and the name of the book is The Imagineers of War. It's the untold story of DARPA, the Pentagon agency that changed the world. I'd like to refer to them as like the Pentagon's mad scientist, but she's the expert. Sharon, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, how long did it take you to write this book?
A lot longer than I thought. I think in my proposal, I thought it would be 18 months. I believe it was 4.5 years.
Is that all? Wow.
I'd been reporting on DARPA for a number of years. So a number of the interviews I had done about 8 or 9 years earlier when I was writing about their 50th anniversary. So, 4.5 years in earnest, and then probably a decade of, on and off reporting on DARPA.
Okay. So my first question would be, is the acronym, is it intentionally hard to remember, not to remember what it stands for? Because, I still have to stop and think. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
it's not intuitive. I think it wasn't, part of it was that this was not an agency that was originally designed to be around for a long time. I don't think they thought, like, what is the sexiest name for it? If they had, they probably would come up with something different.
Yes.
And in fact, I think the original proposal, they were going to call it the Special Projects Office. And then they were concerned people would confuse it with Special Operations. So no, I think the name, which was originally ARPA without the D, was, it wasn't really, it was just like, it was a quick measure at the time.
Sure, right. And so what we should explain is, and actually I should have you explain, but basically what I look at them as is that they were this agency that was started in the 50s and basically they said to them, and I think this is such a wild idea, don't think up crazy ideas, but if you have a crazy idea, tell us about it.
Yeah, so as you said, it was started in 1958 as response to the launch of Sputnik, which had happened a few months prior in 1957. And the idea was the U.S. had been technologically surprised by the Soviet Union. And the President Eisenhower at the time wanted the Pentagon to basically get its act together and to consolidate the space-based programs that the different services, Army, Navy, and Air Force had. And so they created this agency that was basically the nation's first space agency before NASA existed. And, the idea was that we're going to get into space quickly. We're going to pursue ideas that other people aren't pursuing. Maybe it's crazy, but we're going to go for it.
And I think that's a progressive thinking that I couldn't believe that a government like ours would even have back then.
Well, it's true, but part of it was, there were a lot of crazy ideas around 1957, 1958. People were proposing, militarized moon bases, crazy missile schemes. So in a way, you could say that, like, DARPA, or ARPA as it was called, it was sort of going to be the arbiter of crazy ideas. It wasn't that they were necessarily going to be crazy, but there were all these crazy ideas coming into the Pentagon, and they would help decide which ones were maybe crazy enough to work.
Right. And they came up with a bunch of them. And I'll tell you, one of the things I just want to do, I just made a list of my favorites in your book. And the book is The Imagineers of War by Sharon Weinberger. She's been kind enough to join us tonight. And just to kind of get people to get a feel for what DARPA does and what they've done in the past, I just want to run down like some of the things that stuck out in the book, like to me. So at one point in the 50s, basically what the threat was that Russian ICBMs would be fired at the United States, I guess, over the North Pole, and they were trying to figure out, well, how are we going to prevent this? So didn't somebody propose like a large net right over the entire country?
Oh, yeah. There were all sorts of fantastic ideas. There was going to be a net. There were going to be, little mini satellites that would take out, ICBMs. I think my favorite that I talk about in the book was by this Greek scientist, Nick Christopoulos, who emigrated to the States. And he had an idea for a particle beam, basically something that would blast these missiles out of the sky. The only problem was, the way he proposed to power it. They said it would take the entire U.S. electrical grid to power this particle beam.
Wow.
So at one point he said, well, suppose we drain the Great Lakes to generate the power to create this particle beam.
Why not? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is this guy who proposed putting a highway across the entire United States so you could keep bombers constantly in motion. He always had these very crazy ideas.
He was on my list of the DARPA personalities, and that was my second on the list of the different things that they did. He proposed basically what was going to be a 2,500-mile runway, right, where the bombers could land on, and the Russian ICBMs, there's no way that they could, get them all if they're on a runway that stretched across the country. I mean, they
would just keep going. Yeah.
Right.
And, I think what was interesting about that scientist, the reason why DARPA and the people around him tolerated these ideas was that he was scientifically brilliant. He wasn't just some guy up the street. He understood the physics of it, and he was sort of unbridled creativity. Now, sometimes even some of the central people in DARPA thought he went too far, but they were sort of willing to entertain at least the ideas that he proposed and think them through.
Right. At least they kind of got on their agenda or whatever. Another favorite of mine is, now DARPA was really involved in the Vietnam War, and I think, if people have ever heard of them, and their Vietnam involvement was very strange because they were trying to win. I mean, the whole thing about DARPA is it's like, what's the military? What happens when the military and science kind of collide or whatever? And they were trying. It seemed to me like in Vietnam, they were trying to win the war with numbers or psychology or something. But they also didn't someone propose, because the troops were carrying so much stuff, didn't they propose a mechanical elephant or something along those lines?
They did indeed. I think it was like a cybro-anthropomorphic elephant. It was going to be, so it's also now called a robotic elephant, but it was actually weirder than that. There was going to be a human inside operating it. It was completely bizarre.
Wow.
I think one of the DARPA directors even called it a, quote, damned fool project.
Oh, really?
Well, it's you had, Congress would look at these proposals. So you had to do things that were crazy, but at least sounded plausible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, let's get into something that, that they're probably not known for, but you mentioned it earlier. I mean, didn't they want to establish a network between computers of like the early warning system or something like that, and that turned into the ARPANET, and that turned into the internet?
So basically, in the early 1960s, DARPA was given this assignment by the Pentagon for command and control. And I think what the Pentagon had in mind was nuclear command and control. But the guy they hired, named J.C.R. Licklider, was a psychologist who had actually come out of the world of SAGE, which was a computer system that was going to help connect the air defense radars around the United States. These were the radar that would detect incoming Soviet bombers. Yes. And the SAGE computer system was really the first example of people sitting in front of consoles and using computers to work. We think of that natural now, but in the 1950s, using a computer was walking into a big room and putting, a punch card into a computer. It comes out, and then you go back. So he realized, he was one of the first people to realize that the way you would work with computers and networks of computers would really transform things. So his idea at DARPA was to create a computer network, not necessarily for nuclear command and control, but to connect computers together and to transform how people work with computers.
Right, sure. But at the time, it just seemed like such an alien idea, that computers would talk to each other. It's almost like having electric typewriters talk to each other. It just didn't compute, but boom, here we are. Look what it's done.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He was talking about things that people now seem obvious. He had one sort of meeting where he brought in DARPA people and was trying to give examples. And apparently he said, someday you'll be in your kitchen and you'll be able to get recipes off this computer network. And people have no idea, why would you want to,
Sure.
Who cares?
Yeah, right.
He really saw the future that we now take for granted.
Right, sure. Why don't we, we're talking to Sharon Weinberger, who is the author of The Imagineers of War. It's the untold story of DARPA, the Pentagon agency that changed the world. And they are, am I wrong if I describe them as the Pentagon's mad scientists?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely not wrong. In fact, I think it's right. The reason why I hesitate to use that term personally is I think one of the things that people forget about DARPA is they think of it as sort of now the science fiction agency. They do crazy things. But what I always try to emphasize people is that actually part of their role is not to be mad, but to be sort of creative and think about the future.
Right.
But evaluate it scientifically and say, because the thing is, if you just invest in every mad science idea, you're playing the lottery. You're not going to win.
Right.
You have to have some sort of scientific sense. But I think that is, it is a fair way to describe it in some senses.
So I'm skipping around here now, but let me ask you this then. What you talk about lots of things that they have done over the years. They basically invented Siri. They were involved with remote viewing. They invented that blow-up plane, the QT-2, where you would just blow up this plane, put a propeller on it, and off you would go. It would fit in a suitcase. But they did things like, didn't they start crowdsourcing when didn't they put futures on the stock market about, terrorist acts in the future or something?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. So after 9/11, they got involved in a lot of projects, some of which got criticized, even though some of them seem very logical now. And so they invested. They didn't do it. They invested in a project, gave funding for a project that was looking about whether you could sort of use the wisdom of crowds to crowdsource predictions. And in that case, using money, using financial incentives. It's sort of, I think it was called MAPS or MAP. It was sort of a stock market for political events. And it got, as these things often happen, when it was written about, it was talking about, people betting on an Arafat assassination or, hijacking. And it didn't play well in the press. And I don't think DARPA did a very good job of describing it. And so they ended up canceling the project, even though now, sort of crowdsourcing predictions and analysis is very common. Sure. I think that's been a challenge for DARPA. Sometimes they don't think about how these things will look. And that was example of it.
But they've seemed to have shelved things that have come back to basically affect our lives, like the Siri, like the internet or whatever. And so my other question to you, it was on my pink card here, is what percentage of the things you talk about, so many things in your book, and I know that you researched the heck out of it. How many things do you think they've done are classified?
Quite a bit. I think at one point when I was looking at their budget, about a third of their budget was classified. This is probably as of 7 or 8 years ago. My guess is it's probably similar now, but I haven't looked. Luckily, in doing the book, a lot of work had been declassified. So a lot of things after 30 years go under declassification review. And that's why I'm able to write in such a detailed way about Vietnam.
Yes.
I do think that, there's a lot of work, particularly from the past 2 decades, that we don't know about. Now, here's what I'll say about classified projects. Classified projects that work, we tend to find out about because when they are used like a stealth aircraft, it's very hard to keep them secret. Sure. It's actually the failures that are sometimes hard to that sort of stay in the closet, so to speak.
But so what is their budget these days? Is it like $3 billion or something?
Yeah, I will say I actually haven't kept track of DARPA that much over the past 12 months. Wow. But it's hovered around $3 billion, give or take, the past number of years. In general, as the Defense Department budget goes up, DARPA's budget goes up.
So wow, you just surprised me. So, DARPA is something in your rearview mirror?
Well, it's not in my rear view mirror. I keep track of sort of the interesting work they do. But as you could sort of see from the book, I'm about details and about granular level looks. Yes. And so I talk to DARPA people now and then. I try to keep track of the big picture. But, in terms of, when people ask me, where is this project, that project, unless I've really looked at it in detail, people say, is this successful? Is that not successful? I think it's unfair for me unless I'm really interviewing the people involved in that project to say. So, I keep track of DARPA, but not on the same level that I did while I was doing the book.
First of all, I have to compliment you on the book. And I might have said this before, but, I don't think it would be a dry subject, but I think it must have been just a massive project to boil it down to something that is a page turner. It's about this government agency. It is a strange government agency, but you were able to do it. That's from, I guess, one writer to another. I'm just kind of fascinated how you did it.
Oh, that's very kind. And I think that was the hardest part of this book. How do you tell the history of an agency? And unlike, the CIA or NASA, I think what makes DARPA unique on that, it makes it challenging, is a couple things. A, you don't have lifetime employees. There are people who've been there a little longer, but for the most part, people are there 3 to 5 years. So you can't tell the story of an agency through, one person who was there for 2 decades.
Right.
And another problem, and I think something that I wish they would correct, is, most large agencies actually have in-house historians. The CIA does, NASA does. And DARPA has really suffered, I think, institutionally, at least their memory, by not having that. They commissioned one excellent history that I rely on a lot in my book back. It was published in the 1970s. That was written by a former DARPA employee. And then nothing since then. So what I had to do for my book was to figure out, how do you tell the story of this agency that's been this collection of people, and so many projects. And so I don't, it's impossible to cover everything. I try to choose the things that I thought were most representative of what made this agency so unique and so important to the country.
We're talking to Sharon Weinberger, the author of The Imagineers of War, The Untold Story of DARPA, the Pentagon agency that changed the world. Or we talked about earlier, if you want to just refer to them as the Pentagon's mad scientists, because they come up with these ideas, and I'm sure that as we were talking about before, that let's say the majority of them are like either crazy or just things that you can't do, but they have come up with things like stealth fighters, precision weapons, the internet, Siri. They come up with these things that they work their way into our lives in a way. Whether you're in the military or whether you're a civilian. I think the vast majority of people in this country have no idea that DARPA exists, right?
Yeah, it's funny. It's certainly known in the D.C. area. It's known around people who follow tech, but it's never become a real household name the way, NASA has.
But shouldn't it be, though? Couldn't they be really, aren't they the cool agency? Let's face it, they were put together because to cut through the red tape, they have this, this hall pass through the red tape. They can get stuff done very, very quickly. They had guys in. There's one guy who's a picture in your book. His name is George Lawrence. He's a hippie. He's a hippie, and this is a direct report to the Secretary of Defense, right?
Yeah, I know. He was a very colorful guy and did some amazing work. Yeah, I think it's almost a branding issue. Why does everyone know who Steve Jobs is? He's done amazing things with yes. Apple, but JCR Licklider, basically the godfather of the internet, is a completely unknown name outside of computer historians.
And a fascinating guy. He's a fascinating guy, he's the father of the internet. No one knows who he is.
Yeah, and so I think it has to do with branding. Apple is a worldwide brand. If the internet today were called DARPANet, people would have heard of DARPA. Instead, but ARPANET it was called, became the internet, and we know the internet. So a lot of it is branding. DARPA brought us driverless cars, but we'll eventually think of driverless cars as synonymous not with DARPA, but with Uber or Google or whoever brings them to the streets.
Sure, right.
Wide numbers. Siri, who knew Siri isn't called DARPA Siri, it's just Siri. It's a branding issue, but maybe that's okay.
Maybe they need a PR agency. Maybe they need public relations.
They have that. I think they go back and forth between both, feeling that they haven't gotten the publicity that they deserve versus, maybe they shouldn't have it. It's a government agency that continues to do good work. I think it's suffered in recent years in some respects. Maybe it's okay that it's not a household name.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe as long as good work, that's okay.
Well, there's some advantages to flying below the radar, no doubt about it. But so let me ask this though: I feel almost guilty that I'm glad that they exist? Do you know what I mean?
How so? That because it's a military agency?
Well, yeah, because they do come up with some. That whole kind of human science thing, and going into. They're looking into how to regain memories in people, which is really good, which is at the end of the book, and you really kind of emphasize that, hey, now they're doing some kind of work that might actually benefit, veterans and stuff coming home with brain injuries and stuff like that. But, regaining people's memories, as a kind of science fiction writer, that's not too far away from, creating people's memories.
Yeah, this is, one of the things I really tried to do with the book is that, it is an incredibly successful agency, but it's also had some great darkness to its history. It introduced Agent Orange to Vietnam, something that it would happily like to not have as part of its history. Neuroscience, military neuroscience, as you point out, is a very fraught area. And what should not be forgotten, its duty is it's a military agency. Its main role is to help the United States wage wars and hopefully keep the peace, but that's an inherent part of it. It is not the Peace Corps. It is not USAID. It is a military agency. And, that is why, when other countries have talked about doing DARPA, particularly the Europeans, they're like, oh, we want DARPA, but we don't want it to be a military agency. And I understand that. But what people have to understand is the military is intertwined with its history. And for better or for worse, one of the reasons it's been so successful is because it has a customer, the biggest customer perhaps in the world, called the Pentagon, to help to transition these projects. So I don't think it would have ever been as successful if it were a commercial or a
right. I mean, really, the Pentagon is the largest customer you can have in the world, in the history of the world. I mean, they're up at almost $1 trillion. I mean, wow, that's interesting. That led into my next question was, are there any other countries who have something like DARPA? Because once again, what it basically is it's this Pentagon agency. It's a military agency, but they're able to kind of cut through the red tape. They're able to take some like kind of crazy ideas sometimes, but sometimes really incredible ideas, and kind of shoot them through and not have to go through all the stumbling blocks. Like you point out NASA as a perfect example. NASA has to go through all this bureaucratic nonsense. DARPA is, they're like, boom, boom, they're there.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a critical component of DARPA's legacy, that they have much less bureaucracy than other parts of government. They don't have lifelong employees. They're able to award contracts quickly. And one of the things that's striking is, the DARPA of today is not the DARPA of 1958. I remember going through the files, and the employee directory of ARPA then in 1958 fit on an index card. Today, it's a small phone book. So it's a little more bureaucratic than it used to be, but not compared to other parts of government. It can still move very quickly.
And another fascinating thing about it is that these people, they would sit in their offices when they were very, very small, and the guy in the office next to you wouldn't know what you were doing. You wouldn't know what he was doing. They were just so isolated or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's sometimes they wish they did collaborate more, but each program manager is in charge of their projects, and so they're really interacting with people that they're funding much more than they are with their other colleagues at DARPA. I think one of the phrases from a director was, it's 160 people linked by a common travel agency.
So you answered. That's funny. That's actually good. But you mentioned that other countries they would like to have a DARPA, but they don't want it connected with the military. But in a way, that's the smart way to do it, because you'll always get funding.
Yeah, I mean, so back to your previous question, no other country has an equivalent of DARPA. They keep talking about it. Russia at one point said that they were going to create a DARPA. You have to have these totally unusual circumstances. And so when European countries say, we're going to create an agency like DARPA, what they're really just saying is they're going to spend some research money and try to do it creatively. Right. It's not the same thing as an unprecedented set of conditions that led to the creation of DARPA in 1958.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left here. Would you think it would make any difference if they had a different kind of uniform? Something that really...
since about 2/3 of the program managers are civilians, I don't know about that.
Sometimes, the uniforms aren't... NASA, I always thought that if NASA dressed like kind of cooler, they like NASA to me is because I'm a lifelong science fiction fan, but I always kind of kept an eye on the space program. But they were always like kind of boring, They just they didn't brand well, I don't think.
Yeah, well, NASA is mostly engineers.
Oh, okay.
But NASA got to the moon.
Explains
I know.
That explains it, right?
Maybe DARPA needs a better logo.
That's what I mean, like a cool logo or something, or their own TV show. So we got like 4 minutes left. Let me just throw a couple more names out. And I urge everyone to get this book, The Imagineers of War, The Untold Story of DARPA, the Pentagon agency that changed the world. Basically, Pentagon's mad scientists. Has anyone approached you about doing a movie?
Like a lot of book authors, we got a lot of approaches from people for different ideas of series and movies. And I always talk to these people, but nothing ever comes out of it. And I'm okay with that. Yep. I think, it would be hard to make a movie. You'd have to choose a story or a person.
Oh, well, I would choose Tony Tether.
I mean, he's a fascinating person, and they start a lot of fascinating work at DARPA. Maybe someday.
Yeah. He's a funny guy. I mean, on the list of people,
I would certainly watch a good movie about DARPA.
The of the list of people, he was at the top because he's a real character, and he's just some of the things that he's kind of unsure of himself, but they kind of work out anyway. And that was another thing too, is that you said that not many employees stay there very long, and it seems like they go through directors like almost every year, or they don't stay very long. Why don't they stay very long?
Well, in part, if you look across, it's now a political appointed position, and basically political appointees across government only average, I don't know, about 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. So, Tony Tether was there, I think, almost 8 years, maybe even 8 years. Steve Kasich was there 7 years. But you're absolutely right. Most of the directors were there for only like 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. I think they transition out for the same reason political appointees across government transition out. It's all consuming.
Yep, sure.
I will say that any director of DARPA is working, 7 days a week and extraordinary hours. Yep. And as enjoyable and as rewarding as that is, I think for anyone that gets to be quite hard.
Yep. You do it and then you move on. That's how things kind of go down there. Do they pay them well?
Well, it's on the federal pay scale, so it's certainly it's a senior level appointment. Mm-hmm. But that could go to your other question of why they don't stay long. I don't know what that is today, but it's probably a little under $200,000. So if you think about someone who's the head of DARPA, they can easily go in. I'm assuming, but for a $500,000 million salary in the private sector. So I think financial draw is a reason people leave.
It's like your boot camp, and then you can go on to some military contract or whatever, and you'll always be the guy who ran DARPA. That's good.
Yeah.
So, listen, we're coming to the end of the interview, and thank you very much for joining us tonight in this kind of strange time. Sharon Weinberger, who is the author of The Imagineers of War, The Untold Story of DARPA, the Pentagon agency that changed the world. Just go and get it because it's a very, very, very readable book on a subject that, I could see someone else doing it, and it would be just like a doorstop, But let me just ask you one last question. Now, wasn't there a guy who was the head of DARPA, and he thought he was taking a meeting with McDonnell Douglas, but it was actually McDonald's hamburgers, or was it vice versa?
Oh, yeah. This was the head of the person who started a lot of their biological work, where he worked for McDonald's. Okay. He was their science and technology guy, and they had created a new sort of wrapping that I believe was going to be sort of that was going to be they thought it could be used by the military because it was actually could be used right now for coronavirus. Very, very sanitary. And someone said, you should pitch this to the military. Mm-hmm. So he started calling around, and someone told him to call DARPA. And the head of DARPA ended up taking his call because they were confused. He said McDonald's, and they thought he said McDonnell of McDonnell Douglas. And so he got through to the head of DARPA. Yes.
Hey, any way you can get in. Any way you can get into the top guy, why not? But McDonald's, McDonnell Douglas, who knows? So, listen, Sharon, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh,
and we'd love to have we'd love to have you on for part 2, okay? Because I'm just fascinated with the book.
To do that.
And I don't read many books, but this one I just went through, and I would almost ask you to autograph this copy, but it's just so dog-eared and so on and so forth. I'll buy a new copy.
Well, your address, and I'll send you a new autograph copy.
Well, don't do that. I know that's a drag for authors to do. But listen, thank you, Sharon, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And come back anytime, okay? The name, once again, The Imagineers of War, Sharon Weinberger. Just go by it. And you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Mack Maloney's Military Exile Show here on the Distant Thunder Radio Network. This is Mack Maloney. I'm in the home studio with the very lovely Lois Lane.
Hi, everybody.
Lois, we only have a couple minutes to say goodbye to the audience tonight. Thank you for joining me. It's been quite a show.
It has been quite a show. As I've mentioned before, educational and entertaining.
Educational and entertaining. Remember that, kids, when you're listening to it, okay? I just want to thank everyone, for joining us tonight. If you want your bag of swag, one last
plug for we just ask that you go to mackmaloney.com, click on the Contact Us button, send your good old-fashioned mailing address, because it does not magically transport through the internet. You
need the mailing address
to get all your fun pins and coasters and 3D decals, a lot of cool stuff. So just
right. Bag of swag. Just go to mackmaloney.com, hit the contact button, send us your mailing address, and we'll get it right out to you. So it's been quite an evening, Lois. I think we're having a selection from the band Sky Club coming up right after this.
Sky Club, one of my faves.
Oh, really? Yes. Better than the Beatles? Better than the Bay City Rollers?
Bay City Rollers. Oh, my gosh, that's a reference to the past. I don't think anybody will know what that is.
I think a lot of people do. They used to dress like them, right? Correct?
Well, I had the socks.
When you're in high school? A few years ago?
It was, yeah.
Okay. Glad to hear you finally admit it. So thanks again for everyone listening in all around the world. And until next time, this is Mac for Lois and the rest of the gang saying, be safe, be happy, and...
Bye-bye.
Another fellow, a traveler caught in time. He said our old friend number 11 died back in 47. They found his body, they said, what? They checked his pulse and checked his head. Okay. They locked him in the army box. For what? And then the keys to the box got lost. 30 years went by in a flash. Everyone forgot his crash. Then things got a little messy. Yeah. When they talked to that guy named Jesse, he said he seen his face. The distinguished man from outer space. When he saw his deep black eyes, he knew that Raimi lied. But how old was 11 really? Because I heard back in 47, 11 went back to heaven. That got us wondering why. If he knew what it's like to die. And where was his soul right now? Because he's still with us somehow. About my friend who fell to earth. He used to sail among the stars.